This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the Right and Left Discussion Forum. Our purpose is to demonstrate that people can have different political views and still have civilized discussions about potentially contentious topics. We believe that being right is not as important as the relationships we have with our fellow citizens that enable us to share this country. Today's topic is the war on drugs. Our discussion panel today, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services and a member of the Medina County Republican Executive Committee. On his left is Patty Haskins, a retired math teacher from Wadsworth High School and Democratic member of the Wadsworth City Council. We begin by talking with Ron. Ron, after more than a 40-year war on drugs that has cost over $1 trillion, placed over 500,000 people in prison, and cost tens of thousands of lives, illegal drugs continue to be plentiful and cheap. In addition, the war has increased racial tensions and damaged international relations. Now, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything you wanted about the war on drugs, what would it be?
Addiction is a complex issue. It is physiological, sociological, and behavioral. So we know a great deal about alcohol addiction. We probably know an equal amount about drug addiction. A person gets into drugs possibly, particularly in the lower economic classes because of sociological reasons. There are no jobs. This is a way of making yourself feel good for a bit. Physiological addiction can happen of that. So a couple of things I'd do about this. I would, first of all, reverse the felony convictions for drugs, for at least the milder forms of this, particularly for the using of drugs. Mm-hmm. I'd have to think more carefully about the dealers. Mm-hmm. But for the users, particularly in things like marijuana and possibly cocaine. Mm-hmm. Cocaine at one time was, well, Coca-Cola got its name because it had cocaine in it. It was considered a mild stimulant and very good for you, increase mental acuity and all that. I don't know that that's true. I would concentrate much more on treatment and counseling than I would on putting criminals in jail. Yeah. The government has put more emphasis in the money in the local police departments into basically arresting rather than treating. Mm-hmm. There are programs in place. Mm-hmm. There are programs in place since, for probably 10 years now, where drug courts, rather than criminalizing, put people into, halfway houses or counseling and so forth. Mm-hmm. And the rates are pretty good. One study I read about showed that 60% of this program were cocaine users, and only 20% of them went back. So, 2/3 mm-hmm. Improvement on cocaine, which is more serious than marijuana. So I would look at the criminalization aspect of it, the felony convictions, because they're so onerous when you get out of prison. Particularly, you're in an inner city situation where you, as a felon, you can get no legal job, you probably can't get a driver's license, you can't vote. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. Job are not there, so you're going to get back to drugs. Maybe you're going to sell. Mm-hmm. So I'd look at criminalization, I'd look at treatment, and those are the two things I hope my magic wand would be able to address.
Okay, Bryan, you're looking very thoughtful.
Well, I think in the research that I did, it seemed pretty clear that the government has once again tried to treat a symptom and not really look at one of the root causes. To spend $1 trillion over 40 years might not seem like a lot of money, but if a fraction of that money was used to really attack and wage a war on one of the one of the larger fronts, one of the common denominators that I saw throughout this war on drugs is that a high percentage, over 43%, and this might be surprising to some people, of these individuals that are in our prisons for these types of offenses are coming from fatherless homes. And you know, when we're not willing to address those particular types of issues, because we've sort of marginalized the father in the home, we've marginalized the importance of having a two-parent family. You know, people call that the ideal. But when the statistics are you know, you can't ignore the numbers that social scientists are beginning to put together.
Part of the socialization aspect.
Yeah. When you have 4 times more likely of young men that are more likely to be involved in drugs and alcohol abuse coming from fatherless homes, we have to stop the supply of these young people. We have to go to the source, and we need to start changing some behaviors when it comes to this, because we can't build prisons fast enough. We can't incarcerate people fast enough. So we need to really look at some of the real issues that are creating the problem. And I think that's where we fall short as a society. We want to solve the problem, but we really don't want to look at the real source of the problem. We want to throw some medicine at the symptom. And whether that's throwing people in prison or you know, not really looking at the issue and saying, what can we do? I would dare say that if we threw $1 trillion at part of the problem, we'd have a lot less of the problem today. And that common denominator goes across all races, it goes across all cultures. When you start, you know, waging what I would consider a war on the family, and that's where a lot of this can stop. So all this is really, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we're sort of spitting in the wind when it comes to this war. We need to work on the supply aspect of this. Excuse me, not the supply, but the demand aspect of it. And if we're able to knock that down, you know, it will be less profitable for these individuals, drug cartels, to be, you know, selling drugs to our kids.
I think that there's a lot of data out there to indicate that the demand side numbers that we have is distorted somewhat, in that we're looking at, we're measuring the size of the demand by the number of arrests that are made. And the arrests are concentrated in the inner city where it's easier to make them. It's easier to get a conviction when you've got a young person in the inner city that can't afford a lawyer, and he's defended by a public defender that's got 100 more cases just like it and doesn't have time to do much, and he can get scared into a plea. I think we maybe can look at some of that data as being distorted. There is a lot of information that said that the drug use in middle-class suburbs is just as strong as it is in the inner city.
Meth lab in my neighborhood a couple of years ago.
Is that right? Yeah. Patty, I didn't mean to run over you there, but I just wanted to make that comment before I forgot.
You know, I think when we consider the drug issue, we have to come to some kind of agreement on things. We all want to protect our children. We all want to protect public safety. You know, we also want to prevent drug use and provide treatment programs. So the question then becomes, what is the best way to go about that? Everything I researched on the war on drugs came with the same result, that it has been an abysmal failure. I found no articles saying, gee, it's working well. And there have been, I read opinions by Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, which has seen, you know, that city, of course, has had a high lot of drug abuse. And he feels that, you know, one of the things we need to do is to start reentry programs, you know, to keep people off of drugs. We have to look at court reforms, for example, the 3-strike rule and the rulings on the amount of drug that is in your possession before it becomes a felony. I read also in something by Jimmy Carter, who came out and said that, we need to make some significant changes in the country. Now, he supports the legalization of less than 1 ounce of marijuana. I
Now, do you
believe.
mean legalization or decriminalization?
I believe legalization.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Now, I might be wrong on that. You'd have to check me. But he feels that we should not be putting so many people into prison for
Yes.
that. He also feels that we need to remove the mandatory minimum sentences that we have. So many times right now in this country, when you're, caught with drugs, there is a mandatory sentence that you have to be given, and there's no way around that. To look at the person and say maybe a treatment program would be a better option than incarceration. And to add to that then full treatments, also to remove the 3 strikes law, which is still out there and which is causing so much. Also to experiment with the regulation of drugs. And this, some people feel that this would take away the power of organized crime. There are facts that say that we have 2.3 million people incarcerated in the country. 500,000, figure you mentioned as well, are incarcerated for drugs. That's a very high percentage when you consider all the crimes for which people can be incarcerated.
And it's gone from 30,000 to 500,000 since the 80s.
Oh, right. I think I saw a figure. It was something like 30,000, and it's in the millions now that have been incarcerated for that.
Yeah.
And then once they come out of prison, not only can they not vote and other privileges which we have because they have felony convictions, they also are barred from public housing, ever receiving food stamps or welfare. Now, whether you agree with welfare or food stamps or not, is another story. But when you consider a felon coming out of prison who probably can't get a job and gets no governmental help, the odds are probably pretty great that they're going to resort back to other criminal activities.
Yes.
So
We've just totally eliminated any opportunity to survive on the legal economy.
Exactly.
When somebody comes out of prison. It's kind of interesting that when the war on drugs started, Richard Nixon doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for his liberal views or his liberal achievements, but he was really the person who started the war on drugs.
Right.
Well, not.
Johnson did a little bit.
You can go
Nixon,
back 100
yeah.
years and talk about when we started to illegalize things and all that business. But what we call the war on drugs today was a Richard Nixon initiative. But he took a different tack. He spent more money under Richard Nixon. More money was spent on education and treatment than on enforcement, and he was the only president that had that ratio. As time went on, the enforcement became a much bigger thing.
I was thinking Reagan made military equipment available to local officers. Well, it was available because the Vietnam War was over, and what we're going to do with all of those jeeps and tanks and surveillance equipment.
Oh, and helicopters and airplanes.
And helicopters and airplanes.
There were a lot of, Huey helicopters. The Black Hawk, Black Hawk helicopters, and all.
As well.
To fight this war, that's an awful hard thing to turn down when you're a county sheriff, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, and certain laws were passed that said that local officials could keep the profits from drug users automatically, seize all of their assets. So we've made it very profitable for the local government to arrest more people and get them incarcerated. When you mentioned education, I read where it costs $30,000 a year to incarcerate a person.
Yes.
We spend presently on an average a little over $11,000 a year to educate our students. So we're, financially wise, there's more priority, it seems, on the incarcerated than on education. And perhaps if those were flipped, if more money were spent on education, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have now.
And along those lines, we're spending practically nothing on the message that having a traditional family, a mother and a father in a home, will limit and reduce the pool of young men and young women that find themselves looking at a drug charge. I mean,
I don't know what government can do about that.
Yeah, is that a behavior, though, that can be?
We can sit here and argue that, well, then the government can't stop. The government can change behavior when you don't marginalize the family unit.
It's not very often that you see a positive unintended consequence. However, I think that when during the 80s, probably the last time Republicans and Democrats were able to agree on anything, they made some changes in what President Clinton called welfare as we know it. And as a result of that, the single mothers, I hate to use the word illegitimate, a baby can't be illegitimate.
Right.
Baby's a baby. We had another baby born in our family this morning at 1 o'clock.
Congratulations.
Yeah. All right.
However, beside the point, the unintended consequence of the changing the reform or the reforming welfare in the 80s was the unmarried birth rate went way down, and a lot of the people that you're talking about that would have been brought into the system, that's actually been reduced. But I think that you're right. Yes, the government can do something about it by removing the incentives that we've provided.
And when you overlay the corollaries on the statistics, you can't ignore. You can't ignore that over the last 25 years we've had an explosion in this war on drugs. And I'm just saying one of the major contributors, when the latest survey that I read was over 43% of those incarcerated come from a single parent family.
Yes.
2% from just 2 or 3% from being raised by fathers, the rest being raised by mothers. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form diminishing the role of the mother or that single mother. I'm just saying, let's look at the whole problem. Let's attack it on all fronts, not just from saying, let's throw people in jail. But if there's an issue that deserves $500 million, let's throw it at that. We're throwing money up against the wall and see if it'll stick in all these other programs, and some of it's obviously not sticking. So why don't we throw some money and try a social experiment that encourages, encourages fathers. I mean, this latest statistic, over 73% of the children being born in the black community are without fathers. They don't have a father in the home. You can't tell me that pool of people is not going to affect. And like I said, we can't build prisons fast enough, so let's try something different.
My mind is working on what kind of approaches would take on that. It's got to be an education approach.
Exactly.
There's got to be also a monetary approach. There's got to be job creation. There's got to be a way for the fathers, particularly, to stay with the family.
If we're willing to spend $30,000 to incarcerate somebody, let's take $11,000 or whatever it is and educate that young man or young woman. Encourage parents through subsidies for the fathers to stay with their families, and create an environment that they can actually see some success. This isn't one of those wacky things. I mean, I hate to say, but Bill Cosby's been talking about this for 20 years, and he gets pounded down every time he brings up the fact that there is a connection, a corollary here, and it's not that radical of an idea.
We'll pay for this. People are allowed. We'll package marijuana, and the government will tax it.
We can pay for it that way.
We can pay for it.
I'm interested in knowing how the panel feels on either legalization or decriminalization, at least of marijuana and of certain drugs. Personally, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I have pros and cons on both sides. But I mean, we look at prohibition of alcohol, and all that tended to do was to up the crime rate, up arrests. It allowed
power to organized crime.
Organized crime gave power to them. And we are seeing in states like Washington and Colorado where marijuana has been made legal, and part of the thinking behind that is if it is decriminalized or made legal, that it takes the power away from organized crime, away from the cartels, and allows the government then to regulate it and tax it, which could bring in, I think I read something like $47 million could be obtained or was it billion even, by simply
It
taxing.
was billions.
It was
fact,
a billion.
You double that by taxing the drugs and then removing the expense of enforcement. Now you're up close to $100 billion a year.
Yeah, so I just wondered how the rest of the panel felt about that, if they had views on it. I mean, what do you think, Bryan?
You know, I really think that the issue really deserves a serious study.
Yeah.
I really am concerned about the use of marijuana as a gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug. I'm concerned that our youth are being sent very confusing messages.
Yeah, do we need another bad habit?
Right, right.
You know,
I mean,
legalized.
you know,
I
here we
guess.
are. You know, we're fighting these wars and these battles, and I just think sometimes we just don't want to recognize some of the simple solutions. So whether you legalize marijuana or you legalize or decriminalize drugs, I think I probably would be more in favor of decriminalizing to a certain degree the uses of marijuana, so that these young men that find themselves in this trap aren't stuck with it for their whole entire life.
What
I think
about
that's the
medical
problem.
marijuana? Because I know that has been, although
Yeah.
I really think the number of people that get medical marijuana has been really blown out of proportion. But there are some proven uses of that for treatments of
Absolutely.
Like glaucoma.
during cancer treatments. To
Oh,
ECs.
and all kinds of pain management.
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, this is such a huge and complicated problem, not to mention the fact that it's one of the largest industries in the world,
Oh, absolutely.
illegal drugs. In the United States, it's bigger than the automobile industry and the textile industry put together. And if you were to eliminate the opiate products coming out of Afghanistan, there would be no economy in Afghanistan.
Well, that's
And what it would do to completely decriminalize or legalize what are now illegal drugs would probably cause a huge banking crisis in this country, because they process so much money and all. But my view is that this is a complicated thing. It's very, very difficult to do anything. But I think that if we could start off by not putting such obstacles in front of drug felons when they're released back into the economy, by making them eligible for welfare, food stamps, public housing, eliminating mandatory sentencing. I mean, we could make a big dent in the problem by not putting these people back into the illegal drug trade.
I agree with my Republican friend here, just exactly with that. And Patty, your comment about the usage of marijuana and the legalization thereof, there is a physical impairment possibility involved with this. And I wish our pharmacist friend were here. We could ask him, are there field tests available, or can field tests be developed so that a police officer who pulls someone over who's wavering all over the road does not test positive for alcohol and is not texting, can be found to have a more than legal limit of marijuana in his system. I don't know that there are such things, but that needs to be addressed. If we're going to allow recreational use of marijuana illegally, that needs to be addressed.
And we have to look at the impact on the workforce. Because if I'm an employer and I have 75 semis on the road, and I have several of my drivers that are using marijuana legally, I would like to know that, because I'm not sure if I want him behind the wheel.
Well, alcohol's available too.
That's what I was thinking.
And that
Alcohol's
too.
available.
That too. You know, the drug testing, you know, I think a more holistic approach to this problem would serve us so much better than trying to just continue to throw people in prison. You know, there are a lot of solutions, and all of which I agree with.
Yeah.
You know, I agree with all those solutions. I just think that we turn a blind eye to one of the largest contributors, and everybody just wants to look at you and say, well, there's nothing we can do about that. Well, I believe if we put some money to it, we probably can change some behaviors.
Look what we did with smoking.
Yeah.
You know what? That's amazing when I think about it. The smoking issue. I smoked for 50 years, and through most of my life, I was able to smoke anywhere I.
Yeah.
On air. Can you imagine getting on an airplane?
I've been on an airplane.
And light up?
Yeah. Well, I remember getting on an airplane and having people light up. They were sitting in the back of the airplane. That was when they started saying, "Well, wait a second," you know.
Sections, it's all
there
the same
were
here.
sections. Yeah.
Doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
So through much of my business career, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
You could smoke any place on an
Well, sure.
airplane, and if you can change that, you can't even smoke in a sports bar.
Right.
I mean, how outrageous is that?
In certain states. I
yeah.
think you still can in, like, I want to say Kentucky.
Oh, a tobacco state. Well,
Yeah,
I would
there's
imagine.
a few states. You still can.
I would imagine, but it's going to take a president with some courage to attack these problems rather than going along with the enforcement side, and they've all done that. And that I think the time has come for us to insist that a president back some real reform rather than just going after the votes of the people who want to keep everything
Courage.
legal. Yeah. The chances of us being able to get anything done, I think, are pretty slim. But there seems to be a growing voice. Michelle Alexander, who wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, it was a bestseller. And she is spending a lot of time on the speaking circuit these days and trying to gather support for some of these ideas. I mean, we know that the war on drugs, it's like somebody said, it's the new Vietnam, and we're losing it too. And that the problem is not going to go away by just continuing to do the things that have failed in the past. Anyway, thank you very much for another excellent conversation, and I would like to, if I can find it, leave with the following thought. When an event has 5 possible explanations, an intolerant person will embrace the one that best fits their biases and never consider the other 4. A tolerant person will consider all 5 and be open to more possibilities. Thank you very much.